Luigi, what are you doing?
Clearly out of touch.
New insight this Tuesday night into an accused murderer.
Oh my God, like, that's my neighbor.
His alleged manifesto and what may have fueled his anger. Damning evidence against India on foreign interference.
You're playing with people's lives.
What it is allegedly doing to silence critics in Canada, a Global News exclusive. Out of control, the rapidly growing wildfire racing through parts of California. And thou shalt not profit from the Ten Commandments.
These stones are incredibly rare.
But someone will, the heavenly auction for this relic.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. The man accused of murdering the CEO of UnitedHealthcare in Manhattan last week has been denied bail and is putting up a legal fight. 26-year-old Luigi Mangione was arrested at a McDonald's in Pennsylvania on Monday. Police say that arrest was peaceful, but when he was brought to court today, he was angry, yelling something about this being an insult to the American people. He has been charged in Pennsylvania with weapons and forgery offenses and is fighting being sent to New York, where the crime took place. How a man from a wealthy family with a degree from an Ivy League college has ended up the accused in such a brazen murder is what investigators are beginning to uncover. Jackson Proskow has tonight's top story.
Luigi Mangione arrived at a Pennsylvania courthouse defiant.
Clearly out of touch. And it's an insult to the intelligence of the American people.
Denied bail, he's now fighting extradition to New York, where he faces charges of second-degree murder in the death of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson. In court documents, the NYPD says they have substantial evidence linking Mangione to the murder, including written admissions about the crime. A reference to a manifesto allegedly found on the suspect. Frankly, these parasites simply had it coming, it reportedly says. This was the moment Mangione was confronted by police at a Pennsylvania McDonald's Monday after an employee recognized him.
She said it between his eyes and his eyebrows. She says, when I took his order, it was like she had in her mind, oh my God, it's a guy from New York.
His alleged motivations are still unknown, though friends say he may have entered a downward spiral after a traumatic back surgery. An X-ray showing pins in a spine featured on his social media pages. In recent months, he appears to have dropped contact with friends and family. According to the New York Post, Mangione's mother reported him missing November 18th.
Usually when we see people come out and they commit homicides, it's a growth into it. To start out with homicide and murder, premeditated murder, that's very rare.
Valedictorian at a private all-boys Baltimore high school,
I'm honored to be speaking to you all today.
Mangione grew up with a life of wealth and privilege, going on to an Ivy League education. In a publicly released statement, his family says they are shocked and devastated by the allegations.
I can tell you that this is one of the last people you'd think would do something like this.
A man often described as brilliant and polite now sits in a Pennsylvania prison, isolated and under maximum protection as one of the most notorious suspects in America. Jackson Proskow, Global News, Washington.
Members of Canada's Sikh community say the Indian government is weaponizing travel visas to silence its critics. A Global News investigation has uncovered evidence travel visas are allegedly being withheld to coerce Indian Canadians who need to travel to India. The RCMP says the tactic is part of a broader campaign by the government of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, which includes orchestrating violence and intimidation on Canadian soil. Jeff Semple has the exclusive details.
You're playing with people's lives.
In 2016, Indian-Canadian Bikramjit Sandar requested a travel visa from India to visit his birth country and see his grandfather, who was ill. But the visa was denied, and Sandar received an uncomfortable ultimatum.
There's a letter that you got to sign, and you got to make sure that you do get that done.
After his visa rejection, Sandar says he received an email with this letter for him to sign, declaring that India is a great, sovereign, socialist, secular and democratic republic, and denouncing Khalistan, the Sikh separatist movement, and any other movement against India.
So we said we can't sign this document.
Sandar is the former president of this Sikh temple in British Columbia, where he often condemned human rights abuses in India. Sandar arranged a meeting at the Indian consulate in Vancouver and says officials told him he wasn't welcome in India because of his statements promoting Khalistan and criticizing India.
If it's talking about human rights violations happening around the world, that's something we're always going to keep on doing.
Global News spoke with 4 Indian Canadians and their families who all shared similar stories. Their visas withheld unless they agreed to sign a letter supporting India and denouncing its critics.
So in the community, these things are well known, well documented amongst individuals, although rarely spoken about just because of people feel threatened. That you have a foreign power here that is undermining everything that people value as Canadians.
After being rejected, Sandar and 2 other visa applicants said they were referred to this man, Maninder Gill. The BC businessman and former Punjabi radio host allegedly told them if they wanted a visa, they needed to sign one of these letters or make pro-India public statements. Sandar's letter was emailed from this immigration firm located next door to Gill's office. The owner told Global News he couldn't recall the details, but did not believe Gill told him to send the letters.
It is typical of Indian intelligence.
This national security expert says India is known to use unofficial proxies to do its dirty work in foreign countries.
And the beauty behind the proxies is it gives them a little bit of I'll call it a firewall between the people carrying out these acts and collecting information and the government of India.
Gill told Global News he only wanted to help people obtain visas. I have an open door policy, he said. I guide them, provide them information. I have never denied that I have good relations with the Indian consulate. Gill also said he was never involved in any foreign interference. If everybody having good relations with a consulate is branded as a foreign agent, the government should simply shut them down, he said. Gill made headlines back in 2010 after he shot a Sikh activist outside this temple. Gill argued it was self-defense. His conviction was overturned on appeal, and he eventually walked free after the judge said he'd faced an unreasonable trial delay.
The violence that took place.
Gill has organized numerous pro-India demonstrations and events with Indian consular officials, including India's High Commissioner Sanjay Verma. Verma was one of 6 Indian diplomats recently expelled from Canada after the RCMP accused them of orchestrating a wave of violent crimes, including the alleged assassination last year of Sikh separatist leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar. India denied those allegations.
Criminal activity orchestrated by agents of the government of India.
The RCMP says India also withholds visas to coerce community members into spying. Their intel then given to hired guns. As was allegedly the case in this shooting at the home of Punjabi music star A.P. Dillon.
It's not just you're keeping an eye on who is criticizing India. This information is being used to spy on people and getting them killed.
Members of Canada's Sikh community told Global News that India has long used travel visas as a means of silencing its critics, but they say the tactics have escalated dramatically, coercing people into spying and even violence. Donna?
Jeff Semple in Toronto, thanks. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump seems to be trying to get a rise out of Canada. In a late-night post on social media, Trump called the Prime Minister the governor of the great state of Canada, repeating his taunt about Canada becoming the 51st state. Many within the Liberal government are shrugging it off as a joke and a typical Trump tactic. But as Mackenzie Gray reports, no one thinks Trump's threat of a 25% tariff is funny.
The Prime Minister avoiding questions on the latest troll from Trump, calling Justin Trudeau the governor of the great state of Canada in a late-night social media post, which was brushed off by cabinet ministers.
We can't react to everything. We need to focus on being mature as a country.
Again, I don't take offense at jokes.
But it's a joke Trump seems to love making, musing that Canada could be the 51st state at his dinner with Trudeau and on Meet the Press.
Why are we subsidizing these countries? If we're going to subsidize them, let them become a state. We're subsidizing Mexico and we're subsidizing Canada.
Trump conflating subsidies with trade deficits. Canada does run a $100 billion trade surplus with the U.S., but much of that comes from raw materials Canada sells, like $124 billion in oil that heads south. Facts that haven't moved Trump off his tariff view.
I don't think we should necessarily look on Truth Social for public policy. It sounds like we're living in an episode of South Park.
Brave Canada! Brave Canada! They're not even a real country anyway.
Mark Miller referencing this iconic scene, and Trump has blamed Canada for things like flooding the states with fentanyl, despite only 20 kilograms being caught by U.S. border guards last year. Trump's trolling, threats, and tariffs, a tough position for the Canadian government.
How do you plan to negotiate with someone who doesn't seem to be taking Canada seriously right now?
I am really clear about Canada. I know how lucky I am to be Canadian.
The Prime Minister will hold a meeting tomorrow to discuss U.S. relations with the premiers, including Doug Ford, who took a lighter view of Trump's jokes, Donna, saying if he's thinking of the Prime Minister at midnight, it's probably a good relationship.
Okay, Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa, thanks. Last week, Alberta's premier said she thought Trump's apparent joke about Canada at that dinner with Justin Trudeau was hilarious. But Danielle Smith is taking the threat of tariffs on all Canadian exports, including oil, seriously. Smith has gone to Las Vegas, where governors from the western U.S. states are meeting. And she's driving home the point that even with its vast oil and gas reserves, the U.S. needs Canadian crude. Heather Yurix-West explains why.
When Canadian oil goes to market, by and large, it heads to the USA. Canada's energy sector relies on its American customers. But parts of the United States need Canadian oil too.
Because Canada has become a reliable supplier over the years, the Midwest is very dependent upon us. About 4 million barrels a day gets processed in the Minnesota-Chicago area, and most of that oil comes from Canada.
That's because pipeline infrastructure and refineries in the Midwest are specially configured to receive and process Canada's heavy crude. Finding a replacement source isn't easily done.
Having a major tariff of 25% or about $15 a barrel on today's prices could be catastrophic for both U.S. refineries and Canadian producers.
The added cost would ultimately show up for U.S. customers at the pumps. It's a message Alberta's premier has been trying to convey directly to her American counterparts at a meeting this week of the Western Governors Association.
So when I tell them that we have 4.3 million barrels a day of oil coming through to the United States, and that it would be potentially $1 per gallon increase in the cost of gasoline with a 25% tariff slapped on, that gets attention.
Smith says the Prime Minister and premiers are in step, deliberately reaching out to key contacts across the United States. Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec already have permanent trade offices open in Washington, while BC and Manitoba plan to open one soon.
We need folks who are, dare I say it, a little Trumpy.
The prospect of 25% tariffs on imports, though, has no one laughing, as provinces work to find American allies. Heather Yurix-West, Global News, Calgary.
15 charges have been laid a decade after one of British Columbia's biggest environmental disasters. In August of 2014, a tailings pond at the Mount Polley mine collapsed. 25 million cubic meters of water and tailings material spilled into nearby rivers, streams, and lakes. The charges under the Federal Fisheries Act have been laid against Imperial Metals Corporation and carry fines between $500,000 and $6 million.
There are structures threatened here in the area.
A fast-moving fire is raging in Malibu in Southern California. Thousands of people have fled their homes, including Cher and Dick Van Dyke. Hundreds of firefighters are working on it, but it's still out of control. It started Monday night. It's grown to about 1,000 hectares. Students at Pepperdine University had to shelter in place overnight when the fire got close. The flames are fueled by gusts from the notorious Santa Ana winds, and climate change has made fires there more intense and frequent.
It's making it even more challenging for fire departments to respond to wildfire. It's undeniable, from my perspective, that global warming is causing more challenges for us.
Some homes have been destroyed and a section of the Pacific Coast Highway is now closed. What caused the fire is unknown. Trying to keep weapons out of the hands of extremists. Coming up, the immense challenges ahead in Syria after the fall of Bashar al-Assad. Rebels have taken over the ornate presidential palace in Damascus, which for more than 2 decades was exclusively used by deposed President Bashar al-Assad, who ruled Syria with an iron fist, killing and imprisoning his political opponents. The world is now watching the Islamist rebel group who drove Assad out. A caretaker prime minister has been appointed in what's described as a transitional role. But what happens next, whether the Syrian people will really be free, is deeply uncertain. As Redmond Shannon reports, Israel says it is taking measures to prevent extremists from getting their hands on Assad's military hardware.
Israeli airstrikes sinking Syrian warships. A UK-based Syrian war monitor says Israel has fired more than 300 missiles at Syrian military targets since the fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he does not want any of Syria's military capabilities to fall into the hands of jihadists. Referring to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, the group that led the overthrow of Assad. Israel is denying reports some of its troops were seen deep inside Syria, but it acknowledges its new push further into the Golan Heights. Israel illegally annexed part of that region 4 decades ago. It has now also taken control of parts of the UN buffer zone there.
Israeli movements and bombardments into Syrian territory. This needs to stop.
The intense focus on Syria is not unique to Israel. The US, Russia, Turkey and Iran are all involved and have interests in its future too. The country's present is a mix of post-Assad jubilation and bitter despair. HTS says these bodies found in a hospital show signs of torture.
It fuels already an existing enormous rage in Syria that could be translated into attempts to take revenge.
It will first be the task of this man to help stabilize the still fragmented country. Mohammed al-Bashir appointed by HTS as caretaker leader until March.
The transitional government and transitional power has the ability to restrain. But again, there are many open question marks.
And without answers, hope is what millions of Syrians are desperately clinging to. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
From Stockholm to Toronto, ahead, high praise for the so-called godfather of artificial intelligence. He's got his Nobel Prize. British-Canadian researcher Geoffrey Hinton was in Stockholm today to pick up the prize for physics. Hinton, who is Professor Emeritus at the University of Toronto, shares the prize with American researcher John Hopfield. Their work developed the foundations of machine learning and artificial intelligence. And in Norway, the Nobel Peace Prize was handed out today. 3 survivors of the atomic bombings in Japan accepted it on behalf of a group called Nihon Hidankyo. That organization has campaigned for decades against nuclear weapons. In his speech, 92-year-old Terumi Tanaka stressed the importance of the next generation taking up the fight. He said his biggest wish is to abolish nuclear weapons while survivors are still alive. Nuclear weapons have not been used since 1945, but nuclear powers are modernizing their arsenals, and they're many times more powerful now. Tanaka says he is saddened and angered the nuclear taboo threatens to be broken. She already has a bag full of Olympic medals. Now Canadian swimmer Summer McIntosh has more to celebrate. The Ontarian won the gold medal in the women's 400-meter freestyle at the Short Course Swimming Championships in Budapest. Her time of 3 minutes and 50 seconds beat the previous record by more than a second. To add to the celebrations shortly after that race, McIntosh was named the recipient of the Northern Star Award as Canada's top athlete of the year. Thou shalt not covet, unless, of course, you're bidding on this. Next, the oldest stone tablet of the 10 Commandments goes up for auction. The Ten Commandments need little explanation. They're the prophetic teachings, the instructions for life that religious scholars believe were divinely revealed by God to Moses on Mount Sinai and recorded on tablets of stone. Well, now the oldest known tablet is going up for auction in New York City. Heidi Petracek explains how it ended up there.
They're the stuff of history and Hollywood.
His laws of life.
And now the Ten Commandments are up for sale, or at least the closest thing to them.
It is the earliest complete stone tablet of the Ten Commandments.
The 115-pound stone dates back 1,500 years and was made as a replica of the original.
The Ten Commandments have just such a prominent place in theological history, in Jewish history, of course, and even in Christian history. And ever since the Raiders of the Lost Ark, the Ten Commandments have had a particular cultural cachet as well.
Right? You should not kill.
The tablet was found more than a century ago, unearthed during excavation work in Israel. It's well worn for a reason, because it ended up underfoot as a paving stone for decades, until a Jewish scholar recognized its significance.
It was on display in the museum for many years.
It had been in private hands until it came to the Living Torah Museum in Brooklyn 20 years ago, which is where it stayed until convicted financial fraudster, thou shalt not steal, Bernie Madoff came along.
Many of our sponsors lost all their money. The museum was in jeopardy at that specific time.
The museum was forced to sell the stone in 2016 for $850,000. The tablet's second time on the auction block now could see it go for more than $1 million.
Ten Commandments!
But unlike the ill-fated slab in the Mel Brooks film, a condition of sale for this artifact commands whomever buys it preserve it and make it available for the public to see. Apparently in 2024, it's okay to covet as long as you share. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Halifax.
That is Global National for this Tuesday. Tonight's Here Canada is the Kamloops Heritage Railway Christmas train in BC. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.